Lovely. Thank you very much, Claire. Well, quite a lot of you here. It's been good so far, hasn't it? Really interesting, I think. And now you come to listen to me talk about extracting relevant data and insight to enhance the effect. Really? Are you shifting uncomfortably? Then I'll begin. So in terms of what I thought we could focus on today is quite a practical session. We've heard quite a lot so far this morning about strategy, about how to create a digital environment. I think what I'm going to say is here's some practical ideas of how you might get from A to B in terms of your data and thinking about metrics. The human eye sees in a resolution of 324 million pixels, which is about 10 times deeper resolution than a professional photographer's camera. But our brains manage to filter those 324 million data points into something that allows us to make sense of our world and have an idea of where we're going. So our goal in using data is actually quite similar to that. It's about how can we use the right information to guide us and filter out the stuff that essentially is just noise. When you put it like that, it sounds quite easy. You think, yeah, we can do that. And particularly when we're talking to reward people, because reward people are used to dealing with data. We're used to dealing with salary levels, we talk about bonus pools, we refer to RPI, we all know our gender pay gaps, don't we? I'll just pause for a laugh there. So gathering data is one thing, and I think most of us know how to do that. But the next step, and people have talked about that quite a lot this morning, is how do you turn that mass of data into something that is helpful and directs you to where you want to go. So what we're trying to build here is something that can predict results reliably, time after time. What I want to focus on in the presentation is how can you identify the difference that really makes the difference. The big question is, how can you drive performance through data and metrics? So I'm just going to start with a really simple example here. This is a results metric, wanting to lose 5 kilos. Some people might want to lose a stone. Whatever it is you want to use, we're all quite familiar with that concept of setting yourself a goal. And in our business lives, that might be a strategy around improving employee productivity. It might be a growth in sales. It might be an increase in new customer numbers. But all of those things are a goal. They are a results metric. They tell us when we get there. When we look around high-performing HR companies, what we've been able to see is that there are some key strategic results metrics that high-performing organisations often seem to track. Quite interestingly, earlier there was a question, wasn't there? What are the main things that you might want to track? So I'm talking a bit more specifically about compensation here rather than generalist HR. But the things that we find people continually ask are, how can I get the best value from my pay spend? How can I decrease employee turnover costs? How can I attract the right calibre of new hire at the right package, and in brackets afterwards, that we can afford? And how do we ensure that our high performers get the lion's share of the pay bill or the pay review pot or whatever it might be? And then there's a supplementary question to that which often says, how can we make sure that our high performers are well paid against the market? So those are all some of the results that organisations, particularly when we're talking to reward people, those are the results that they're trying to achieve. But unfortunately in life, a bit like just writing on a bit of paper that you want to lose 5 kilos, it doesn't really get you there. What gets you there are identifying the key performance metrics that you know, if you do them, you will find that they result in the outcome that you want. So, for example, we all know this stuff, don't we? We eat less, we exercise more, and if you do that consistently for a month, at the end of a month, you will have lost weight. You will have made some progress towards your results metric. But it's quite hard sometimes to put that into real action from an HR and a reward point of view. It's quite easy to identify these things, but when you then have clients saying to us, how can we make sure that we're monitoring what we're doing and we're progressing in a direction that we want to do, it can be quite difficult when people are absolutely drowning in data. What are the key pieces that will make the biggest difference? And further on in the presentation, I'm going to give you some key bits of data that we've spent time analysing and really thinking about and drilling down to that really help you understand, on gender pay, for example, how you can make a difference. So using tech to analyse our data. We talked about this on our round tables earlier, I'm sure you did as well. Using tech to analyse the data, whether it's stuff we're really familiar with, like employee engagement scores that have been around a long time, or perhaps some of the newer stuff that might be around now, so using salary management software, or looking at some of the things around using some of the stuff that one of the speakers earlier was talking about in terms of his analytics and presenting MI back. All of those things are what you're going to need to do if you're going to simply reduce that huge amount of data that's coming into you into something that helps you see where you're going. It's really difficult to do it without those things. And sometimes, I think there's all of us probably have been guilty of this at times, it's very easy, particularly we're bad at this in HR, to say, oh, I'm hearing good things, or you tell little anecdotal stories that you've heard to reinforce your point. The problem is that HR directors and senior reward people need to be going to meetings with hard, relevant data that they can rely on, that has proof behind it, that the business can rely on. So when the HR director is sitting in a meeting with her SMT colleagues or the exec or the board or the REMCOM, she's sitting there as an equal partner to the CFO, Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Information Officer. She has a dashboard of results-driven metrics that enable her to tell the business how the people side of the business is really doing and how you're working towards that. Now, we talked earlier, we had a presentation from Nestlé, and we also had some information from Neil, didn't we, about what Google have been doing with HR analytics. That sort of big data, I think, is out of the reach of most of us. I think it's really difficult for us to find that sort of data easily. But what we can find is our own small and quite precise data, which enables us to move towards having some metrics that, like these, you know if you do, you will end up in the place that you want to be. And that can make an overall difference to your business success. So how do you do it? How do you get to these sorts of performance metrics in a way that allows you to come up with some really good answers? I have to be honest, it is really long, it takes ages, and it's really boring. And the problem that you're doing conjoint analysis and these sort of calibrations between if we do this, then will it make a difference here, is that you get an awful lot of negative, i.e. there is no relativity between these 2 points, and it can take a really long time. But if you can persevere and find the things that really make the difference, it can be quite spectacular. I think sometimes we're too quick, and I've just been talking at coffee with a couple of people, we're too quick to jump to the solution without spending enough time really investigating what we need to do. On my previous slide, I had the thing about eat less cake. Well, imagine if you misread or misunderstood that metric and actually started eating more cake by mistake instead of less cake. You're going to end up more Robbie Coltrane, I think, than Robbie Williams. So it's that type of thing that is important to try and make sure that you are pointing people in the right direction on your metrics. So what we spent time doing on gender pay, and I don't have time to go through all of these things, but on gender pay what we spent time doing is, if I'm working with a client, and we've got a range of clients that we've done gender pay headlines for this year, from property to financial services to sport, to different types of organisation in sort of also between the public and private sector. So a big range of organisations. And without fail, all of them have said, look, I'm happy with the headlines. We can do that. Yes, there's an admin burden with that, but we know how we can get to an answer, or we can outsource it to you to get us there. But what I'm really worried about is how are we going to reduce that gender pay gap over the next 2 or 3 years? And how can I be sure that what we're doing is not going to lead to an expanding gender pay gap rather than a narrowing of the gender pay gap? And so we spent a lot of time looking at predictive tests that will enable me to come into your organisation and tell you whether you're going to have a problem with reducing your gender pay gap or not. And the one I'm just going to spend a bit of time talking about is ad hoc pay rises. If any of you have ever seen me speak before, particularly on gender pay, you will know that I go on about this a lot. So my first question is, how many of you know in your organisation how much you spend on out-of-cycle pay reviews? So ignore the annual pay review. What are you spending on promotions and market rate reviews and benchmarking and other, which is a surprisingly common reason I found on people's HR systems? So hands up if you've got an idea of the figure or you know it absolutely. Not bad, actually. A few people in the room know that, which is great. What's your gender split on that? Don't know. So that would be the next level. So first of all, you need to know, what am I spending outside the pay review? Because frankly, we've all sweated to the last decimal place on the pay review, haven't we? It's next then, what's going on out of sight? Then we split it by gender. But actually, that still doesn't give us the answer. The performance metric that I want you to find is what percentage of salary is your average out-of-cycle raise for men and women. And we have spent a lot of time looking at this, and I'm afraid the results are depressingly consistent. What we found is that the average out-of-cycle raise for women is 5% or less of her salary. And the average pay review for men out of cycle is, come on, someone give me a bit of a bid. 8, 10, 11 to 15. Close, but no cigar. And the thing about that is the number that you need to be able to go to the board and say, we have a problem. The reasons why that might happen is it men get bigger promotions in your organisation, are they better at arguing for a pay rise? All of that stuff can come out of that hard fact, that data that gives you insight that allows you to set your strategy. Because the strategy needs to be about, we need to think about this a bit more and have better control. In terms of that sort of journey, we're a consultancy and we have a lot of data. So relatively speaking, it's something that we can do. What does your analytics journey need to look like in order to start moving from where you are, which is this huge mass of 324 million pixels all coming into you at the same time, to something that is concrete and clear and you can get an answer on? So I think the first thing that we would suggest is that you really work on what performance looks like. So, and you need to be specific about this. So if you're aiming for a figure, for example, you want to reduce staff turnover, it's no good just saying, oh, we want to reduce staff turnover. That's like my 5 kilogram weight loss. What is it that we want? What would be good and what would be great? And getting some real understanding of that sort of metric. To get to that, you might need to do some background work. And the background work, for example, we've been working with the England and Wales Cricket Board recently, and they set us a load of questions that they needed answering. Specifically, what's the overspend against the market? How much is being paid in salaries above the upper quartile? Who's it being paid to? And finally, is it being paid to the people that really drive our organisation forward, or is it being paid to the people who shout the loudest? Now, giving them the answers to those questions enabled them to have a whole conversation about creating a map between talent and reward, and being able to create a template that works, and giving you, as an HR person, reward manager, much more information and much more data to be able to go to the REMCOM and take your seat as an equal rather than a lame duck. I do understand that setting goals and nuance is not as simple as weight loss, but I do think it's possible with some real thought and consideration to end up with some goals that are achievable, but also you do understand how you might get there. But there are loads of goals, aren't there? I don't know about your own tables, but we talked about what are the key things that we really want to focus on, and everybody had a different answer. So how can you identify the things that are going to make the biggest difference? So if you've got a long list of results you would like to achieve, you can't possibly achieve them all, and you can't possibly spend the time creating predictive metrics or performance metrics that will allow you to get there. Performance, remember, metrics are things that says eat less cake. They're the things that if you do them, they will get you there. So what we tend to use is this model. Now, I can't claim any credit for this. When we were working with ITV, they basically used this as their model for changing their strategy and changing the organisation when Adam Crozier joined them, so a little while ago now. And they've got 3 main areas, and it's really helpful, I think, to think about these things. So the first thing to think about in terms of prioritising your time on this is fix it. So where is the rain coming in? What is actually broken? And going back to my gender pay example, the example for clients was, it's broken. We are really worried about this stuff with gender pay. We don't know how to fix it. Please, can you help us? That's the first priority, where you've actually got a problem. The next priority, if you can move those out of the way, is to think, what could we do to strengthen our processes? What can we do to make sure that we can do the same thing over and over again? They're bulletproof, they're industrial strength, gold-plated, whatever you want to call them. We know that every time we go out and hire somebody, we've got the tech that allows a manager to look at what are the current incumbents paid and what does the market say. And it's easy for her to go and do that. She doesn't have to fight her way through a spreadsheet. She can just go and look at the information. Because if you want to make these new habits stick, they need to be really simple, they need to be seamless, and they need to have no friction involved whatsoever. And those are the key things that will make the difference. And then finally, accelerate. And I think we started to talk about some of these things on the table. So let me give you an example. Over here, I am head of talent. I know the talent map for my organisation. I know who my highly successful people are. I know who's in succession behind them, and I know the people that I'm keeping an eye on because I'm really interested in them. Over here, I'm head of reward. I know who's being paid the most, who shouts loudest, who's being paid against the market consistently or inconsistently. So once you can start to overlay that data, then that gives you some real insight to be able to accelerate. And you can make sure that within your organisation, you are not wasting money in terms of pay bill. You've got an overlay and a correlation between high-performing individuals on that talent people are interested in, and from a reward point of view, you know what you're doing. But it's hard to do that if you don't have the facts at your fingertips. So using tech to simplify your data and allow you insight makes the decision-making process, at the front of your mind. It's like your eye. You don't need to spend ages thinking about it. On this slide, we've got pay data, the lines across, so lower quartile, median and upper quartile, and then the black dots are the actual incumbents. So immediately when you're sitting with the manager and you're trying to decide how much you should be paying somebody to come into a job, you can see at this level we know we're paying slightly over market and we're paying about 20,000 for a job that's perhaps worth a bit less. At the far end, we've got a problem over there, haven't we? We've got people doing what looks like the same job, but they're being paid really differently. That's interesting. But at the same time, what would happen if you could overlay that with male and female employees, so you knew who was who? And then what would happen if you could overlay that with performance scores? So suddenly you've got, at a glance, a picture that tells you a huge depth of information, way beyond what you can easily find out with spreadsheets, and equally is easy to jump off the page so that when managers go and see it, they're like, yeah, I get this. You don't need to explain it to me. I'm not very good at reward, but I do understand what you're showing them to me. Immediately, it gives people the chance to be able to see the sort of tech, whether it's this, whether it's employee assessment processes, whether it's benefits programs that people have been talking about. There is so much tech out there. And part of your job is to make sure that you've been round and assessed it and whether you think it might be of any use in your organisation. And then when you get there, how can you really fuel performance? So we've spent a lot of time thinking about the results. We've talked about the performance metrics. But now how are you going to put fuel on the fire? And I suppose some of this is about creating a business case. And one of the things that's always hard, and I do think is particularly hard for HR because we're not great with hard data, is to think about how can I make a business case that will really develop where we're going. I'm really concerned that as a profession we're falling behind our colleagues in finance and other parts of the business in our management insight and analytics. I think we are starting to become the poor relation, and it's our job to recognise this stuff and take it on board. So you might have to go and ask for some money to do some of this, and it might be that you're asking for money to, do a better process around your graduate intake. It might be that you need to examine turnover in different factories because you've got a high turnover problem in one factory and not the others. What's the difference? What's going on? And that might take some investment from outside the business as well as within. But just imagine for a minute, Sarah, who's in the audience here, she's one of my colleagues, she's been working with a client who's been looking at an overlay of tenure and performance. So just imagine for a moment if you could have a situation where you could identify how long into their stay with the business do your salespeople start to really perform. 2 years? At 2 years, they are moving into their peak performance. 4 years, perhaps they're starting to drop off a bit. Having that sort of information means at that point you can target them with information about pay, you can make sure that they feel happy, and you can make sure that they want to stay with the business. And by doing that, you enable the business not just to save a bit of money on recruitment, but to save thousands in lost sales. And it's those sorts of metrics that really end up driving the business forward. In HR, we all want to be strategic. I've never yet met someone who just goes, actually, I'm quite happy, I'm really just operational, I don't mind. Most people want to be strategic, and the best performing HRDs are those who really, really know their numbers. But too many of us, I think, don't, and perhaps haven't recognised the opportunity and the challenge. But being able to sit in front of your SMT colleagues or the board with this sort of data enables you to take your place in a far more strategic way. So they've got 2 final questions for you. One is, if not now, then when are you going to start doing some of these things? And secondly, what would you like to know about your organisation? Thank you.
Technically at the end of time, but we do have quite a lot of questions on Slido, so should we just go with the top one? That's the most popular.
Okay. I've worn a very deliberately quite noticeable jacket, so if you want to come and talk to me afterwards, you can. The hourglass test on gender pay is simply, if you've got an hourglass in your organisation and the top of the organisation is all men and the bottom is all women, you've got the biggest problem. You see it in financial services all the time. If you've got a horizontal line through the organisation, you will really struggle to reduce your gender pay gap. We've worked with clients where they have more men than women, like in aviation, for example, but the women are all the way through the organisation. But typically, and it is mostly FS, you just get this complete inversion at about sort of halfway up the grading system where there just doesn't seem to be hardly any women getting beyond that. That's the first and sort of worst situation. But the trouble is with that, it's a bit defeatist. So that's why we went on to look at some of the others.
Okay, thank you.